Hey everyone and welcome. Pardon the hat, it's backwards because I've got a lot of quarantine hair going on. In fact, if I took off the hat, a lot of people say that I look exactly like Timothy Chalamet, except with red hair and maybe a little bit older, maybe a lot older. But, I know you're probably thinking that's fair. Anyway, we're going to look at tables right now in Microsoft Word, which is something that's used quite a bit in a lot of documentation. So in this video today, we are going to look at some table basics, how to add and arrange a table the way you want to with as many rows and columns as you want, how to format and style so it looks exactly the way you want it, and then we'll close things out with some tricks for converting text into a table and back again. And you'll see what I think are some techniques that will save you a lot of time. Let's get right in. In this module, in this chapter, we will be working with data, which can sometimes be an important part of a Word document. Of course, it's all situational. It depends on what is your typical type of Word document that you're working on. We will work with data that we originate in the Word document. We will also work with data that originates outside of a Word document in an Excel spreadsheet. And so we'll look at how to manipulate the data, and we'll also look at ways that we can kind of hack the use of a data object, a table, and use it for more text-heavy applications. So we'll do all of that in this chapter. So we have a block of 5 paragraphs of lorem ipsum text. And what I'll do here is at the end of this first paragraph, I'll just hit the return or enter and give me another paragraph break. And this is where I will insert the table into my document. So to do that, I'll go to the Insert tab, and you can see that this is yet another thing that can be added to the table. So I'll hover the mouse over the table button. When I click on the button, the little arrow should indicate that there's something else. There's like a menu or some options to the button, the command that lives under that button. So you have several choices here. You can insert a table by using this little graphical representation. You also get the live preview that shows you what the table will look like when you give this a click. You have this as well, insert table, and this is kind of a manual way to insert a number of columns and a number of rows to your table. And then you can select your auto-fit behavior. Now we'll talk about this in more detail as we continue on, but the default should be that your fixed column width is set to auto. What that means is that the object, the table, will take up the width of your page and stop at the margins. So notice that if you decide to use this insert table dialog, you have this option as well to remember your dimensions for any new table that you create. I'm going to click on Cancel. You also have the ability to draw a table. Now this is just drawing a cell and a column, cell row and column borders yourself. This is not something I prefer because it gives you this pencil and then you draw something and it can be a little confusing. It can end up being something like that, and you're like, what did I just make? Did I just make a text box? So for that reason, I don't like using the draw table, because what you've done is you've drawn a table with one cell in it, so one column, one row. So I'll just undo that with Control-Z. I'll go back up to the Insert menu, and this time I will do what I think is my favorite one, which is just use this little selector, and you should be following along too. If you want to, you can just watch and learn this stuff, but I'm going to draw a 3x4 table. And so all I have to do is just hover my mouse, and when I'm ready, go ahead and click, and now the table is inserted into the document. Now, much like a picture that's inserted into the document, this thing is essentially just another character, and that's why I used a paragraph break to insert the table. Now, once you've got this table inserted, the cursor should be blinking at the upper leftmost cell in the table. So that is what is selected. A cell in the table is selected. If you want to select the entire table, you can click on this little icon right here, this little crosshairs, and in fact the mouse pointer changes as well. So when you do that, you select the entire table. If I click in one of the cells, now just the cell is selected. you also have on the right-hand side this little resize handle. And I'm going to go ahead and click and drag that right now, and you can resize up and down. And notice that once I get to a certain point when I'm trying to resize up, that the table won't let me collapse the cells any longer. So in your table, if you're following along, just collapse this a little bit from right to left. So we will reduce the width of the table. And now what you can see is that with the cursor in one of the cells, I can go to the Home tab and I have some formatting options that are very similar to working with any other block of text. I can align the text in the cell, center aligned, right aligned, or left aligned. But because the table essentially acts like another character in the Word document, I can select the table and do the same thing. I can center align the entire table, right align it. The justify won't do too much. In fact, if you click on justify, it'll take you back to the left aligned. So in our table right now, the one that we'll use as our working document as we work with data, let's do two other things. Let's click in the upper left-hand cell of our table, and let's start to add a row of information. So I'll go ahead and pause the recording right now and type in the information that you can type into your table. Okay, so all I've done here is that I have typed in the box office totals from 2018. I've used Box Office Mojo as my source. So these are the year-to-date gross figures for the top 3 movies at the time of this writing. So Black Panther, Avengers, Infinity War, Incredibles 2, there's the year-to-date gross, and that is the domestic gross or U.S. figures, not worldwide figures. In any event, you can do anything you want to, but if you want to pause the tape and copy exactly what I've entered into my table, that's perfectly fine. Go ahead and do that now. Now, as you're entering this information, a couple things to take note of. One is that if you hit return or enter on your keyboard, it will take you within the cell down to another line. It will make a paragraph break within the cell. So it's one way you can kind of get a hint that not only can you work with numbers in your tables, but you can work with text, and the text behaves just like any other place that you're working with text in a Word document. So as you go between cells, you can either click and set the cursor where you want to start entering the next data in the next cell, or you can hit the Tab key. And when you tab, you go from one cell in the table to the next cell in the table. In fact, the word tab and table share the same root, the same Latin root, and they are actually very closely related within Word. Another way to navigate between the cells in the table is to use the arrow keys. I'm using the up and down arrow keys now, and now I'm using the right and left arrow keys to navigate back and forth between cells and within the text in a cell. Now, once you've done those things and entered in whatever you want, you could enter in the stats from your favorite baseball players or your favorite soccer team or whatever, you then will want to select the entire table, go to the paragraph grouping in the Home tab, and let's go ahead and center that table. Before we leave things off in this opening lesson, let's select the table once again. And notice up here I've got 2 tabs of table tools. Go ahead and click on the Design tab and we will apply a quick table style. So in this gallery here, click the drop down and let's do something like this one here. Grid Table 4, Accent 1. So now that that's done, it may change the layout of the table itself. But if I click elsewhere in my document to set the cursor somewhere else, I can see the results of those quick style changes that I've made to this table. All right, at the very end of the previous lesson, you saw that when we applied a quick style to our table, that it overrode what we previously had done. So once I had made that table center aligned and then applied the quick style, it moved it back to left aligned. But that's okay. I can still select the table and then do the center align or center justify. So getting the table to look and be positioned exactly where you want it to be in your Word document can sometimes be a matter of trial and error. And as a general rule of thumb, if you want to use a quick style, use it first, and then you can do some fine-tuning of the positioning. Now, speaking of that, we'll be looking at three other things in this lesson. We'll be looking at the text wrapping, adding additional rows and columns, and looking at some of the auto-fit options you have. So if you've built a table that contains this information and you've center justified it, you might notice that it is kind of by itself, and that's fine. That's exactly what I wanted. You'll also see here in just a moment why I almost always use a hard paragraph return as I start to build a new table in my documents, and why I think you'll end up doing the same thing. So let's first look at the text wrapping options that you have with a table in the document. When it is selected, you'll go to the Design tab and Layout tab, and you can look high and low, but you don't have that little Layout Options button that you do when you are working with a picture or a shape in the document. Instead, to get to the text wrapping options, you want to give the table a right click, and again, you have to right click on after selecting the table, or just right click on that table selector icon and then go to table properties. You can also get to this, by the way, if you go to the Layout tab under Table Tools and click on that button right there. So notice here in the table properties you have two buttons you can click on: text wrapping, none, and around. If you click on around, you have this positioning that comes up, and now you can be rather precise about the distance from the surrounding text, left and right, vertical positioning as well. So what can happen as I set my option back to none and cancel is that once you have a table positioned in your document and you change your mind, you say you want to put it down a little bit, or you want to try to put it between these two paragraphs, it is sometimes more difficult than it seems. One of the things that happens is that you'll notice that the alignment guides, which help you position pictures against the margins, aren't there to help you. Now, they can still be active. If you go to the Layout tab and try to confirm this, you can see that the alignment guides are still, if I were to align a picture, the alignment guides will work. But if I am aligning this table, I can shove this out into the paragraphs, or out into the margins, I should say, as much as I want. And notice what's happening with the text. The text in the paragraphs of this document is wrapping around the table. Now, if I go back to table properties, when I did the drag and drop operation, it changed from none to around. If I now click none, then this is going to happen. So there's kind of a reset button that you can attempt, but once you've made the change, it's a little bit harder to get that table exactly where you want, because as you can see, if I move it again, the text, this is the behavior of the table. It changes from none to around. So it's one thing to keep in mind, and that's why I almost always start with a hard paragraph break and then start to build my table with kind of a clean space in the document. Now that we have an idea of what the implications are when you move the table within your document, let's now look at this. Let's add additional rows and columns, and there's several things you can do. One thing you might have noticed already, as you hover the mouse close to a break between either a column, as you can see here, or a row, as you can see here, you get this icon that pops up. And this lets you add additional rows and columns very easy. All you have to do is click on the plus and add an additional column or a row to your document. Here I've added an additional row. If I wanted to add an additional column, I could do the same thing. Now, once I click that, notice what's happened here. The gray shading tells me that this row is selected, and with that selected, it might be hard to see. In fact, you won't see those little insertion things again unless I go back to the top of this very one here. So the behavior of the additional row and additional column icon, that button, can be a little bit confusing. Now, another thing that's less confusing, in my opinion, is when you go to the very top of a column, you get this little column selector icon. That little downward facing arrow lets you select a column. What you also should see is the mini toolbar, which will let you insert parts of a table. So you can insert above, below, left, or right. Above inserts a row, below inserts a row, left and right insert columns. So if I want to insert a column to the left of this currently selected column, I can click there, and I've just inserted a column. Can you do this from the ribbon? Of course I can. If I select the entire table, I get the table tools, and now I can select the layout tab, and I have this rows and column selector. Not only can I click on these buttons to insert rows above and below, columns left and right, but I can even click on this and insert cells, insert entire rows, insert entire columns. Now let's talk about the auto fit options. Notice over here in the leftmost column of this table that I've got some text that is wrapped within a cell, and I've got text that is not wrapped. What I can also do is I can select text and use the Home tab, or I can use the mini toolbar, and I can increase the font size just like I can any other text in my document. But say if I choose 22-point font for Black Panther, then you can see that the text wrapped within the cell. Why didn't the cell just keep expanding this way? Well, it has to do with the auto fit options. And you can get to the auto fit options either by right-clicking on the table itself and going down to auto fit, or by going to the layout tab, and in the cell size I can choose auto fit. So now I have the option to auto fit contents, auto fit window, or fixed column width. If I auto fit the contents, notice what happens to some space that was on the right hand side of the year-to-date gross numbers, and notice what happens to this cell here. The cell resizes so that it accommodates exactly the width needed for that text, so it fits on one line. Now if I keep adding text, then notice that the cell, and in fact the entire column, keeps going. It keeps expanding to accommodate the text I'm adding. And why is that happening? Again, it's because of the auto fit contents selection that I have chosen. Now let's go back to the auto fit options and use this one, auto fit window. Auto fit window will expand the entire table and the cells within the table in order for it to fit the width of the page that I'm currently using. And in this case, the boundaries of the page is also governed by the margins, which I can verify in the ruler up here. Now, this last auto fit option is a bit of a strange one. So to set this up, let's go back to auto fit contents, so it will condense our existing table. And then with auto fit contents, we'll just set the insertion point at the end of this text here, Black Panther, and we'll continue adding text. So notice that, as you saw before, the cell expands. Now go back to auto fit and fixed column width. And this is effectively turning off the auto fit behavior that we've seen before. So now if I continue to type, add text, now the text wraps within the cell. So that's what's going on with our auto fit options. We'll look at some other formatting options for tables as we continue on. Here's a time-saving technique that could save you, depending on what you are dealing with. It could save you either minutes of cutting and pasting, or it could save you even hours of cutting and pasting. If you have a list of things like this, like 3 movie titles, you can convert this into a table very quickly. You can also convert stuff like this into a table. So if you've got things that are listed and they're separated by tabs, they're separated by commas, what you can do is select those items, and you can go to the Insert menu, you can go to the Tables grouping here, and in your Table drop-down, you can convert text to table. Word's pretty smart about this, by the way. It'll probably guess correctly about how the columns or rows in your table should be separated. So what you can choose here is the number of columns. You can adjust this if you need to, but the separate text at is really going to be the most significant one. So now I've got here in this list, I've got 3 tabs. I've got left tab, which is the default tab stop, and then you can see in the ruler I've got another left tab here and another left tab here, and I've just got this very simple list of 3 movie titles. So again, if I choose Convert Text to Table and click on OK, then I create a table with, in this case, 3 columns and 1 row. I can do the same thing here by selecting some names and go back up to the Insert menu, go to Table, and then Convert Text to Table. From this dialog box, you can once again confirm what the choices are. This time, we're going to create 2 columns and 3 rows. And the separate text at value is set to commas. So Word is looking into the selection and seeing that you've got 3 paragraph breaks, so it's going to do 3 rows, and you've got a comma between the values, and so it's going to choose to separate text at the commas. So once you do that, with the autofit selection that was chosen in that dialog box, you've got 2 columns of equal width, and you've got a table that looks exactly like that. Now, there's a way to reverse this operation, this vice versa here. You can select a table and convert it into text very easily rather than do a cut and a paste operation over and over and over again. I'll go ahead and undo that a couple of times. You can select the table and this time go to the Layout tab under Table Tools. And in the Data grouping, click on this button right here, Convert to Text. Convert the table to regular text. Now you get a dialog that looks like this. Do you want to now separate the text with tabs, commas, or other? So if you've got a table and you want to make it to a more conventional list of last name, first name, go ahead and choose commas, and you kind of reverse the operation. All right, so if you're working with a lot of data that may have been imported from elsewhere, hopefully these techniques can save you a lot of time.
So there we are. Hope that was helpful for you. If you enjoyed the video and you think I've earned it, be sure to like, subscribe, all that stuff. Really, the worst thing that could happen is that you'll get more content like this, tips and tricks on the apps you use every day. Take care.